You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I'm your host, Koku. Today's show, before we get into today's show, let me give the customary free biz shout out. Free business shout out goes to Stephanie Renee's Salon, located at 1614 West Main Street in Kalamazoo, Michigan. The zip code there is 49006. You can reach Stephanie Renee's Salon at 269-459-6535. That's 269-459-6535. They're conveniently located inside Cali Beauty. Next up is amymarie.maven.com. That's AMYMARIE.MAYVENN.com. They also deal in natural hair care products. Their mission is to provide high-quality products with unparalleled shopping experience, world-class technology and hair care products, etc. You can find them at amymarie.maven.com. Next up is Melanated Conscious Society. You heard me talking to Kepra L on my podcast several weeks back. You can find them at www.melanatedconscioussociety.com. melanatedconscioussociety.com is a mentor Black community empowerment organization in Jacksonville, Florida. Make sure to follow them on all social media platforms. And if you have a skill or talent related to marketing, like social media marketing or graphics, or whatever you can do, or reach out to them and offer your assistance. It's for a good cause. It's organizing for our people. Lastly, Glennae Davis on Twitter. She could be reached at GLENNAERN@gmail.com. I'll just read what she sent me. She said, "Hello, thanks for your reply. I'm Glennae Davis, an LA-based registered nurse, author of a critically acclaimed memoir, Yet Here I Stand, creator and chief nurse of Nae's Vision, a healthcare media empire where we provide the healthcare education and planning to bridge the gaps of knowledge between discriminated, disadvantaged people facing employment discrimination and the healthcare industry, resulting in having a strategic plan with the medical support they need to no longer be victimized, merchandised, or marginalized by the system." I currently have 2 products available for your listeners. Number 1 is the memoir, and number 2, a free health checklist. So guys, if you're listening, make sure reach out to Glennae Davis. Once again, her email address is GLENNAERN@gmail.com. I also want you to take a listen to this.
Greetings, Bitter Medicine supporters. It's Caramel Yogi, aka Tamika, the creator of Victorious Ones LLC, where we help single parents find peace and harmony through meditation and vinyasa yoga. Visit Caramel Yogi on IG or send an email to caramelyogi@gmail.com. CARAMELYOGI. We will help you stay on your path of peace and harmony.
I also want you to take a listen to this.
Greetings, family! In case you didn't know, the Bitter Medicine Podcast hosts an online book club. Every month, we will select a book to inspire the Bitter Medicine Podcast listening audience to read along together. At the end of the month, we will host a call-in show book discussion live on YouTube. This is a great dynamic way for readers to not only enjoy a book, but also have others to bounce ideas off of. It's been said that if you want to hide anything from Black people, put it in a book. Do not allow this to be true anymore. Head over to www.bittermedicineblogs.com and subscribe to our newsletter for important updates. Do that today. Join our reading collective today and empower yourselves, your family, and your community. Peace.
Yes, indeed. We just finished, for the month of October, we just finished reading Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. And this new book for the month of November is Black Power by Kwame Ture. We'll probably discuss destruction of Black civilization in the next podcast. That should happen in the next podcast. So, about today's show.
Who is the black man?
The black man in the West has ceased to be black, not of his own volition, but he's actually been stripped of his blackness. He has been stripped of the language of the black man. He couldn't speak the language of his own people. He had to speak the language of strangers. And today, he speaks the language of strangers. He knows nothing about the indigenous language of his people prior to being brought into the Western Hemisphere. He has been stripped of the black man's name. He has been stripped of the black man's culture, and actually also stripped of the black man's history. And just as a tree without roots dies and becomes dead, when a people become stripped of their history or their historic roots, they also become a dead. And for this reason, the condition of the black man in the Western Hemisphere has been that of a dead man. And this dead thing was also dehumanized. The slave masters robbed us of everything that we could use to prove that we were a part of the human family, the black family. And this is the condition that our people in the West are in today.
That was Malcolm X, if you couldn't tell. That was Malcolm X talking about what the black man has become. I want to play another clip. Let me play this clip here, and then I'll really discuss what today's show is about.
A new discovery which has not yet been published. It relates directly to the black communities across America. After here, I'm going to Bimini. As she said, I'm also going to be speaking at the Washita Conference again in Louisiana about this. But before I tell you about that, people will say, well, big deal, so what? Why is history important at all? History is extremely important. Imagine if I could take from each one of you as an individual everything you knew about life up to last week and just erase it. Where would you be? You'd be lost. You'd be incompetent. You wouldn't know how to plan for the future. And you do the same thing with a people. If you erase their history or you don't tell enough about their past, they also become incompetent and they can't fulfill the future. And that's why a lot of people in the black community have felt, well, how come all of the dreams of the civil rights movement aren't yet fulfilled? And one reason is because this history is still suppressed. It still isn't taught. But there's been a recent discovery which is going to blow the lid off of all that. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Now, basically, what science has now found, although this is suppressed for the most part, there have been some great researchers. You have some wonderful books here, like by Evan van Sertima, who's talking about these things. This is not taught in your public schools, although it will be. The history that the children are learning today is not going to be history that's going to be taught in the next 25 years. It's going to be radically different. We now know for a fact that long before Columbus, there were 4 major migrations of blacks to the Americas, different parts of the Americas, for totally different reasons, totally separated from each other by many centuries, but nonetheless there were these black, you can call them migrations, but they were not entirely. I'll describe, and you can make up your own mind what they were. The most recent of these took place about 400 years before Columbus was even born, and it's all outlined in a marvelous book over there. It's called The Golden Trade of the Moors. And it is now known that the West African kingdom of Mali had huge fleets of merchant vessels, and that these kings, these black kings of West Africa, began sailing across the Atlantic to Mexico as early as 900 AD. Now, why did they do that? They did that for trade, not for conquest or invasion. They did this for trade. Mali was very wealthy in gold. They had lots of minerals. Some of the black kingdoms, they were called the Yoruba or the Benin. They were great workers in bronze. But the trouble with West Africa, and it's still a trouble today, not enough food, famine. Somehow, the black kings of Mali had preserved this tradition of long before, where there was this kingdom across the sea, a totally different one. It was very hard to reach. You needed to have excellent ships and good sailors, and nobody in Europe was doing it at this time. But if you cross that sea, this other kingdom across the Atlantic was very rich in a certain kind of food, which the people over there called maize. We now call corn. And these West African kings launched at least 2 major fleets, trading ventures, that went across the Atlantic 900 AD to about 1600 AD. And they brought over their bronze work, and they taught the Mexican people, the ancient Mexican people, who were then known as the Mayas. The Mayas had built up a great kingdom of their own, but in 900 AD they were in decline. They were really on the outs. Nobody knows exactly why, but their society was in decline. They were losing all of their technology. Then these black fleets came across from West Africa, from Mali, and they presented a lot of gold work, bronze work, and in return, they came back with shiploads of corn, maize. Now, we know for sure that this actually happened because very recently, you'll see in the next issue of our magazine, not this issue, the next issue is coming out in about 2 weeks. This is part of the discoveries are happening so fast and furious, it's hard to keep track. They now have found that a certain type of maize or corn, which is growing in West Africa, has been growing there for many centuries, is not native to West Africa. It is a type of corn which comes from Mexico, could have only been brought over by these Mali seafarers over 1,000 years ago. So this is a first concrete proof that they beat Columbus by centuries, and were not just on a voyage of exploration. They were going back and forth, bringing corn back. Now, why do we know about that? Well, this trade stopped abruptly 1600 AD. 1600 AD, the Spanish, the Portuguese were on a real aggressive colonizing campaign, and they took over Africa, and they destroyed a lot of these kingdoms. And with the destruction of these kingdoms went all the knowledge and all the history of these past trades. This is a tremendous lesson for us because, you know, we're so proud of our American civilization. We think it'll go on forever. But when a civilization falls, history tells us it takes almost all memory of it with it. Civilization is really very fragile. And that's why these lessons from the past are very, very important. If we want to preserve our civilization, we have to learn what happened to these others that crashed.
So that was a white guy, if you couldn't tell, and don't worry about his name, but he's supposedly a former neo-Nazi, but he's dropping some knowledge there that you may have never heard before, you may have never read before, and he's dropping it quite succinctly, if I'm to be honest. And, you know, why am I playing those 2 clips of Malcolm X talking about who is the black man today? Or why did I play that former neo-Nazi, that white guy, talking about your history of your ancestors in Western Africa. Well, I'm sure you guys can put two and two together. You can see the title of today's show, and those clips are in support of that title. We're talking about genetic memory. I think our folks, again, because we're not scientifically minded in our approach to life. I talked about that in a previous podcast. You could look that up on YouTube. Because we don't take that scientific approach to life, we don't then expose ourselves to certain scientific concepts, certain scientific thoughts and theories. And that holds us back. That holds us back because if we pay attention to science, it will force us to pay attention to commerce or economics. And clearly we're not doing that, not as a group. And the conscious community is aware, but as a group, we're not doing it. Okay? But I want to talk about genetic memory because I look at the youth sometimes. And those of you who follow me on social media, you should have seen a post from me recently asking a true or false question. Is it the case that our youth in the black community lack home training? And, I'll answer my own question. I think it is the case. Every day I walk past an area here in Brooklyn that was recently constructed. They turned the street into a pedestrian walkway, where they have those little bistro tables and chairs, and you can sit there and, eat or, socialize, whatever. And where it's located, most of the youth in that area are black youth. And every time I pass by, the youth are out there just tearing up the spot. Running behind other youth with the chairs that are provided out there, sitting on these light tables, just destroying the stuff. And you could tell there's just no regard for it. None. And it might be hard for some people to believe this, but we weren't always like that. As a people, we weren't always like that. But we've lost ourselves. And we failed to remember who we were. And again, today's show is about genetic memory. I'm going to talk a little science today. And I'm going to talk about science and a concept in science that you need to be aware of. Because it's time that you unlock your greatness. You have it within you. It's in your DNA. It's in your DNA. And if it's in your DNA, that means you pass it on when you reproduce. Just like our ancestors did before us. We need to remember. We have to remember our greatness to get back to greatness. We need to remember. A part of being great is having a code. Michael Jordan had a code which facilitated his greatness, which allowed him to be great. He shot 1,000 jump shots a day, if I remember correctly. As an example. He hit the weight room. Steph Curry isn't a good shooter because he takes a couple of shots every day. No, he practices shooting to give himself that muscle memory so that his shot sinks every time, or almost every time he takes it. Memory is important. There's a movie came out maybe 2 years ago. It's based on a game, The game is called Assassin's Creed. And I never really played the game too much, to be honest with you, so I'm not, heavily invested in the character. But when the movie came out, when it came onto television and online and stuff, I tried to watch it several times. I can't get through the thing at all. But it starts off, so to me it's kind of a bad movie, but to you it might be great. Maybe you're more invested in the character. I don't know. But the one thing about the movie that I liked and piqued my interest about it is that the protagonist he's a modern day guy, right? But he's able to remember the memories of a long dead ancestor through the help of this machine that they have, right? And the thing about it is that got me is, right, I know that with movies, they tend to slip in some knowledge that you didn't have access to before. So there's probably some machine out there that Whitey is creating to allow him or her to travel back in into the memory of an ancestor, which is what the Assassin's Creed movie is, right? But also it made me think of a scientific paper that actually shows that in worms there's a model organism, a kind of a roundworm called C. elegans. And in C. elegans worms, they were able to show that the worms were passing on information about the environment in such a way that the new generations of worms were already aware of the environment, right, at birth, essentially. They didn't experience it and then it clicked. They just knew it at birth, and it was because of how the environment was manipulated with their ancestors 14 generations prior. So we're talking about the F14 generation, for those of you who know science and genetics. So some of you may be asking, why are we worrying about worms? We're humans. Well, there's not a big difference between worms and humans. These C. elegans that we're talking about in this paper have neurons, skin, gut, muscle, and other tissues that are very similar in form and function to those in humans. The genes that control the development and function of these tissues have been conserved from our common ancestor. Conserved meaning remained the same, pretty much. From our common ancestor, and our common ancestors from millions of years ago. The C. elegans is also a model organism. Don't be fooled. They may be small, but they have more genes than you have. These C. elegans worms are not visible by the naked eye. You have to use a dissecting microscope to see them well, right? And as small as that is, these worms have more genes than you do. Therefore, there's a likeliness that what happens to worms happens to us. Okay? So, in this worm study, what they did, and I'll get a little deeper into it later, but what they did was they exposed these worms to a certain environment and made it so that these worms expressed a certain protein when in that environment, right? Only when in that environment. And then they changed the environment, then they had them breed, and they found that up to 14 generations later, when placed in that environment that their ancestor was placed in, that forced genes to produce these proteins that express a certain phenotype, these worms, 14 generations later, were doing the same thing as their ancestors under the same environmental influence. Get it? You see, when you talk about ancestors, you are a recipient of ancient DNA. Within you, listening to this podcast, you have ancient DNA within you. Your genes come from your parents, from their parents, from their parents, and so on and so forth. Environmental changes affect how your genome expresses itself, how it behaves. So things like chemicals or, the way you exercise or any psychological issues you have can affect your genes. Okay, there's plasticity within your genes. It can affect them. Stressors could have affected your ancestors' genome and been passed down through the generations. This is a science that's, one of the schools of science that's relatively new. It's called epigenetics. Epigenetics just basically means outside genetics. And epigenetics is a part of science that studies the changes in organisms caused by modifications of gene expression rather than alteration of the genetic code itself. In other words, your DNA is not being changed, but can be modifications to how the genes are expressed. The genes themselves are not being changed. You get it? So, for example, periods of stress, as I mentioned before, can add an extra layer, so to speak, of info on top of your DNA sequences. The DNA, once again, the DNA is unchanged, right? Now, this is important. This is very important because you know who knows this already? White folks know this already. White folks know this already, but you know why they won't tell you it? And yes, I'm saying that they won't tell you it because you're not going out on your own to study it. You see what I'm saying? You're not preparing yourselves or your children or grandchildren to get into science and study science for their own people. White folks do that. That's what a part of organizing is about. White folks study to protect hegemony. They study to protect their domination, their being the dominant society. You're not doing that. You're waiting for white folks to come and tell you what to know. And that's the nonsense that we got to stop doing. We have to stop doing it. Even if it's the case that white folks are carrying out the experiments and publishing the experiments in their journals to give information to other white folks, you can read the journals too. You can keep up with the information. You can train others around you to keep up with the information, to decipher what the information means for your community, for your people, for yourself. This is where we're losing. This is where we're losing. We're just a shell of our former selves as a people. And we're not doing anything to build ourselves up to remember who we were. And so because of it, we'll always be exploited. That's what happens to weak people. Weak people are exploited. And it might not be that the exploiter wants to exploit you, but if you're showing weakness, if there's a weakness, they're going to exploit it. If your house or your apartment has holes in the wall, mice and rats are going to run in your apartment. There's a weakness, they're going to exploit it. So the dominant society knows this about genetic memory. They've designed and conducted There are experiments to show it, albeit in the C. elegans worm, which is a model organism, meaning that it is an organism that likely has applications to humans. And I'll tell you how I know the so-called dominant society, these white folks. I'll tell you how I know that they know that there's genetic memory. Do you know that Jews during the Holocaust, if you remember the history that they crammed down your throats, Jews in the Holocaust were, walked into ovens and, executed and brutalized, etc., right? It was white-on-white violence. It was white boys being savages with other white folks, right? But do you know it's known that the survivors of the Holocaust had lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol in their blood, meaning that they were more vulnerable to fear, right? Now, we're talking about the survivors of the Holocaust, right? That's what happened to them. Their environment added that layer of information on top of their DNA, and so the way their genes would usually express themselves was modified due to the events they went through. Do you know it is known that the descendants of those survivors have lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol? Meaning that the descendants of the survivors of the Holocaust are more vulnerable to fear. And for those who don't know, cortisol is nature's alarm system. That's your body's alarm system. It's released in response to stress and low blood sugar. But the point is, they knew this. They know this. So if they know this about the Jews, and remember that was all white-on-white violence. If they know that about the Jews, who they, fucked with, you don't think they know that about you? And what happened, the interruption of history during the transatlantic slavery? Of course they know. They know you're still suffering that PTSD. But they also know that within your DNA, within your genetic memory, is the greatness that you were before their arrival on our shores in Africa. And that is the point I want you to get to. We had a great history before any slavery. We can have a great history again if only we would take time to remember. I'm going to take a quick station ID break. On the next side, I'm going to speak more about this experiment that they did and how I related it to black society. Stay tuned.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions. Black people face one problem: the problem of ignorance. This is why those who opposed us stole us from our parents, disconnected us from our continent, and enforced on us illiteracy. But now the ignorance is self-inflicted. We send our children to their machines. We detach ourselves from our motherland, and we don't read meaningful literature. Consciousness is a series of stages. The sooner we get to one, the sooner we are ready for the higher. The pro-black compendium accelerates the beginner to the advanced and provides for the advanced and unparalleled breadth. This is the sort of book your enemies do not want you to read, but our ancestors would insist you read twice.
Peace Seeker. This is only from the pro-black perspective, and we need power. Power will not be handed to us. We need to build power. But in order to build power, we need a power blueprint. You need to study the best blueprints available. You have Gardners. You have Wilsons. You have Williams. You have mine. Now, you'll have Cooks. Carlos A. Cooks was Garvey's best student, the greatest mind in the world from 1940 to 1966. Yes, the greatest. Yet Whitey doesn't want you to read his blueprint. Cook's blueprint isn't religious. Cook's isn't for integration. Cook's isn't for communism. Cook's isn't even for anti-blacks. Cook's blueprint is for Africa. And Cook's blueprint is the unknown blueprint that was the basis of black power as we know it today. When you say buy black, you're talking about Cooks. When you say black is beautiful, you're talking about Cooks. When you say Malcolm got something right, you're talking about Cooks. But Cook's blueprint was lost, and Whitey is hiding that blueprint behind a $1,000 paywall. He's hiding solutions from you, telling you you need to take out a small loan to get the information that can liberate you. Whitey does not want you to have solutions to your problems, but you need solutions. You need power. I will give you the Carlos A. Cooks Reader, valued over $1,000 at a 98% discount, $15. Send $15 to cash.me/$ABS only with the subject Carlos and your email address, and I'll send you the ebook. We need power. You need blueprints. Start building today.
Greetings, family. This is Koku, host of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. In case you didn't know, we have an online book club called the Bitter Medicine Book Club. Every month, we will select a book to inspire the Bitter Medicine Podcast listening audience to read along together. At the end of the month, we will have a call-in show and book discussion. This is a great, dynamic way for readers to not only enjoy a book, but also have others to bounce ideas off of. They say if you want to keep anything away from black people, put it in a book. Don't allow this to be true. Head over to bittermedicineblogs.com and subscribe to our newsletter for important updates. Do that today. Join our reading collective today and empower yourselves, your family, and your community. Peace and blessings.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Again, I'm your host, Koku, and we are discussing genetic memory. And, I played in the first segment, I played a clip from Malcolm X discussing who is the black man today and why he is that way. And then in the next clip, I played some white guy, he was described as a former neo-Nazi in the video. And he was talking about the history of West Africa, the greatness of West Africa. And we are in a position today where we don't remember it. If white folks don't tell us about it, apparently, it seems like we don't remember it. And what I'm advocating for is black folks getting in touch with their Africanness, getting in touch with their African history. I think that's the key to unlocking your genetic memory as a group. And I think once we unlock that genetic memory, I think that will bring us back on code, right? Because like I said in the first segment, you can't be great without a code. Michael Jordan had a code. Kobe Bryant had a code as far as their conduct on the court that allowed them to be great. And once we unlock this code, I think we can get back to our greatness. In fact, I want you to listen to this clip.
What I was showing him was this picture here of these statues that were found over in Egypt, Upper Egypt, of black men that were placed there or carved out of solid granite thousands of years ago. And if you notice, he didn't ever turn it toward the camera. He kept it down. Well, I started to turn it toward the camera, but I didn't. I was trying to be polite. And at that point. And but today in the Los Angeles Times on page 2, they have this same picture. You look in today's Los Angeles Sunday Times, and they have a story on page 2 about this temple over in Africa. They call it Egypt, but Egypt is in Africa. And the value of which is so tremendous, it points out how the United Nations is trying to float a loan of around $30 million to save this temple from being covered by the waters that will be brought up by this Aswan Dam that they're trying to build over there. And this thing is so shrewdly done that the average Negro will look at it and read it, and because it says Egypt, he never identifies it with him or him with it. It shows you how shrewd the white man is. But when all you have to do is look at the features of the thing, and you can see, brother, they got all the features that the white man says Negroes have. But because it is associated or connected with something of such value, archaeological and historic, anthropological value, the white man tries to steal it for himself and says, no, these are white people, these aren't black people. And look at this for yourself. Look closely at it, and then, and if you notice, you'll also read in there where the United States is on record as being against putting out the money necessary to save this archaeological wonder. They're against it. And it tells you in the paper that they're against it. They want to let it go on and go beneath the waves. There was a time when America would be for preserving something like that. Because in those days, the black man was so dead mentally, he could look right at it and wouldn't know he was looking at himself. He looked right at it and wouldn't know he was looking at himself. And today, when we see a black man, we know that's a black man. Whether they call him an Egyptian, a Re-Egyptian, or an Ab-Egyptian. Don't care what they call him. All you got to be looking like you, he's the same thing as you. And this man that they have here, brothers and sisters, it has nothing but the features of a pure black man. Also, they tell me that there's an exhibition going on in Los Angeles right now somewhere about King Tut. Where is that? Some kind of museum. Where is it? Exposition. Where is it? Oh, Exposition Park. I saw King Tut's mummy tomb when I was in Egypt. And I don't know if they have the same one here, but if you go and see it, you'll find out that this King Tut, whose mummy or sarcophagus, whatever they call it, they have, it's as black as this board. And the white man knows this. Every picture that they have of King Tut, he's not brown. No, he is black, brother, just like this. And the black people who lived in that day had mastered science to such extent, had mastered chemistry to such extent that they could create colors that the dye hasn't faded to this day. Now you know this. The white man got to paint his house every year. You got to paint yours, inside and out. And you haven't got a piece of cloth at home that won't fade if you put it in the sun. But yet these black people back there could make dye that has retained the color, same grade quality, right down to the day from 5,000 and 6,000 years ago. They were master chemists. And this tomb, and I guess this mummy, is gold encrusted. They had so much gold back then. In fact, those were the people who discovered gold. They knew what gold was. White man didn't know what gold was. And they encrusted their mummies with gold and beautiful colors and just laid them there. And finally, when the white man discovered them, he was shook up and wondered, how could these people back so long ago, supposed to be dumb, know so much about so much, know so much about so many things that he doesn't know about today. And usually when he projects these findings, these wonders, these relics from the past, when he projects them into this particular society now, our poor, dumb people, number one, they usually don't go and look at it. You don't find very many Negroes in museums. No, they don't. They go to the ballpark, to the ball game. They don't even go to the zoo. You seldom find Negroes in a museum or in some place where there is something that's going to teach them something. And again, I'm not knocking Negroes saying this. I'm talking to you and me. As Minister John said, there's no strangers here today. We're having a little family chat. And when you have a family chat, you can talk the faults as well as the liabilities as well as the assets. And once you pull out these liabilities, you can correct them. You can go out to any museum and you'll find white people, white women, white mothers, white parents taking their little children through the museum, showing them this and showing them that. Why, our women don't do that. And because you don't do that, you actually leave a vacuum in the mind of your child. So now I don't know what this exhibition consists of these Egyptian relics that on display out here. But as Allah blessed me to see it when I was in Egypt at the Cairo Museum, all of these splendors that belong to that ancient civilization along the Nile that has shocked the white man are relics run out of the past of the black.
And there you have Malcolm X once again dropping some jewels there. Now, if you notice something at near the end of that, Malcolm X had to make mention, I'm not knocking you Negroes, right? We're talking amongst family here. And that's interesting that he had to do that back then, because it seems like I have to do that now. I might be somewhat harsh about some of the dumb stuff our people do as a group, but it's all love at the end of the day. It's still love at the end of the day. I want to see my folks do better. I want to see us win. Winning is beautiful, right? And I love to see beauty. But Malcolm X had to do that back then because he knew if he didn't say it, and even with him saying it, some Negroes were going to be mad. Because we have this somewhat childlike obsession with being childlike. We don't like to be corrected. And we don't give up on certain ideas. No matter how much truth and stuff you put forward, we tend to deflect and get emotional about what's being said. That's in opposition to what we believe or want to believe. In fact, I posted something on Facebook. It's a meme I got from somewhere else. That was critical of Obama. And that's a poignant meme because untimely because right now Obama's trying to scare black folks into voting in the midterm elections next week. And I could do a whole show on that foolishness, but one of the scare tactics that's being used by the Obama and Oprah and, black folks of that sort is your ancestors died for the right to vote. And I find that ironic from Obama invoking the ancestors and, if we don't vote, we disrespect the ancestors. But Obama disrespected the ancestors. And some of you don't want to hear it. Look, I was Obama supporter. I voted for him twice. But at the end of the day, I still could look at his report card, his scorecard, and I could give him a failing mark. You know, all the Obama apologists will continue to talk about Republican obstructionism and all this kind of stuff. When Obama was doing stuff for gay people, didn't he get to do it? Republicans don't particularly like gays. You know, and I could go on. Obama was able to do what he wanted to do. You know? And all I could remember Obama doing was singing Al Green at a funeral. In fact, most of the things I remember about Obama is him singing. You know? So, anyway, that's a topic for another day. But today's topic, just to get this back on track, we're talking about genetic memory and how black folks today have cut themselves off from remembering who they really were. Slavery was a traumatic experience and an interruption to our development as a nation, but underneath it all, it's still the memory of how great we were. And I've played several clips in this show of Malcolm X speaking and some ex-neo-Nazi white boy. But he was dropping some stuff about Africa and West Africa in particular. And he said something interesting. He said, if you erase someone's history, like you who are listening right now, if we deleted your history up until today, you would be a grown person lost in the world. And that's what black folks are. We're lost. We're lost. And when you're lost, when you're empty, right, you're open to any suggestion. When you're lost or you're empty, you're open to any suggestion. So your Oprahs, your Obamas, some white boy, anyone could suggest to you what to do. They could suggest to you, shoot at each other in Chicago all day. They can suggest to you not to build yourself up, not to build your own businesses, not to support your own people. Anything is suggestible to you. And we got to do better. And how we do better is we need to go back and do some soul searching and reconnect through our DNA. Reconnect with Africa. Right now we got a lot of clowns out here who are trying to shit on Africa. And trying to shit on people of African descent from the Caribbean. And that has to stop. We got to embrace Africa. All of that narrative about, this anti-African narrative, we got to get rid of that narrative and get rid of the people speaking it. We got to get back to our basics. And the crux of this show is that, but I'm talking about it from the standpoint of a scientific paper that they published. The scientific paper, the title of it is Transgenerational Transmission of Environmental Information in C. elegans. Transgenerational transmission. That means passing on from one generation to the next information about the environment for these C. elegans worms. Now, this paper was published in 2017, but white folks already knew that there was such a thing as genetic memory. As I said in the previous segment, they know that that the descendants of Holocaust survivors suffer low cortisol in the blood, meaning they have low levels of the stress hormone, which makes them more vulnerable to fear. And they knew that already. So they damn sure knew the effects of Jim Crow, slavery, and all that stuff on you too. Colonization of Africa. They know that as well. But they also know that beyond that, because as black people, we tend to think from slavery to now. No, but beyond that time, you were great. And you can be great. You just have to reconnect with those memories of your greatness and that code that your ancestors lived under to achieve that greatness that they had. But before I leave, I want to describe this experiment that they did so you could understand how it worked. How they were able to see that there was this transgenerational transmission of environmental information. They took these C. elegans worms. Now, C. elegans worms have short lifespans. So that means that you could do a lot of trials of an experiment in a pretty short time, in a few weeks. You could do many trials in a few weeks. What they did with the worms were they engineered the worms to carry a gene that produces a protein. That's what genes do. Genes produce proteins, and the proteins is what the proteins that are produced, that are expressed, that's what gives us a trait. So if you have blue eyes, you have blue eyes because of a protein that's being expressed. And that protein was translated from a gene. So these worms were genetically engineered to carry a gene that produces a protein which glows, right? Which fluoresces or glows under UV light. You have these worms. Scientists inserted this gene that produces a protein that when a UV light is shown, is flashed on that protein, it fluoresces or glows, right? Okay, so that's the setup. Then what they did, they placed these worms in a cold environment and observed how much the protein glowed under UV light in a cold environment, and the glow was very dim. Very, very dim. The worms were then placed into a warm environment, and the glow was much brighter. Okay? So those are two environments, a cold environment, a warm environment. In the warm environment, the protein that was being expressed in the worm glowed much brighter. So information about the environment influenced the gene to produce a protein that either glowed a lot based on the warm environment or glowed very little based on the cold one. This is very smart stuff that they're doing here, right? So they then moved the worms back to the cold environment. However, the gene remained glowing as if it was in the warm environment. You see what they did? There's like a crossover. They made you think they were going one way and they came back. What they did was cold environment, low glow. Switch it up, put them in a warm environment, more favorable, the glow was much brighter. Put them back into the cold environment, the worm wouldn't forget the warm environment. And so the protein still glowed as if it was in a warm environment. These worms were then allowed to reproduce. The gene was passed on. Obviously, that's what happens when organisms reproduce. They pass on genes. For 14 straight generations, that gene not only was passed on, but each worm in each successive generation was aware of the warm environment without having experienced it. How did they know? That protein glowed in these worms as if they had been in the warm environment. Isn't that amazing how science can work that way? I mean, this is a sound experimental design, and it definitely shows that there's memory. We talk about muscle memory, but very little do we ever speak about genetic memory. This shows that there's a genetic memory. The researchers who did this study, they're not quite sure why this phenomenon happens. They believe it might be a form of biological forward planning. That is, it would make sense that worms would transmit memories of past conditions to help its descendants predict what their environment might be like in the future. Because remember, these worms have short lifespans. Their life cycle is short. So you ain't got time to come on to be born and on some trial and error shit. From you are birthed, what are the favorable conditions? This is what evolution is about too, by the way. And the thing is, if worms do it, why don't you? I've talked about it on the show in the past. Why do you allow your children to come up and become young adults, teenagers and young adults, before they know what racism is? Before they know what it is that whites are doing, that they're organizing against you. That the education system is designed to protect their hegemony. It is designed to protect their domination of you. Why is it every generation in black society, and again, I've talked about this a lot of times in the past, why is it every generation in black society has to start from scratch? We're unconsciously transmitting the information of greatness that black people have been in the past, but we're not passing on the knowledge. Right now you have dormant memories and you have no current knowledge. We're not preparing our youth. I spoke about those youth by this pedestrian sidewalk they built close to where I live. And the youth are just destroying it. It's like they have no home training, no understanding of, keep things around you at least decent, for God's sakes, whether you built it or not. Because when it's gone, it's gone. That's a resource you don't have around you anymore. And that's us. That's us interfacing and interacting with our environment, and we're destroying it. Our youth are destroying it. We also got to push black excellence. Yeah, Whitey's doing a real major job on us too, and has been doing it for some time, but we can do some good shit on our own too. We don't have to fall for the traps. We don't have to fall for the pitfalls. Your greatness is within you, man. Tap into those memories. Do some soul searching. Go and educate yourself on who you were. And that's how you will know who you can become again. And it doesn't have to take thousands of years, man. If everyone got on it who is in this generation, by 2 generations from now, 3 the most, we could have this thing turned around. We can have this thing turned around. Some of you guys do more studying of drug dealers and their story than you do of your actual, more respectful, more honored story. Anyway, y'all, I'm gonna leave it there. But if you want to read that scientific paper, I urge you guys to. You don't have to have a science background to read a scientific paper. Challenge yourself. The paper was in a journal called Research. The title of that paper is Transgenerational Transmission of Environmental Information in C. elegans. ELEGANS. Look it up. Read the paper. Understand some science a little bit more. Inspire your children to understand some science a little bit more. Let's stop this nonsense where we're just getting information from these other folks. You know? Read Dr. Ivan Van Sertima. Read Chancellor Williams. Join our book club. Read this stuff. And I'm sure once you read it, your DNA will start to resonate with what you're reading. And you'll wake yourself up. You're asleep right now. White folks are creating statues showing Africa asleep. You're asleep right now. Get in touch with who you are. Get in touch with that, your genetic memory. That memory, those thoughts, those activities. You know, everything that your ancestors went through and they passed down to you. You are resilient, man. Not many groups of people would have survived what our group of people survived. And what has us here in this state that we're in now. But we can do better. We can do better, and it's time to do better. Reconnect. I'm going to leave y'all with the words from a gentleman I respect a lot.
History is a clock that people use to tell their political and cultural time of day. It is also a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells of people where they have been and what they have been, where they are and what they are. Most important, history tells a people where they still must go and what they still must be. The relationship of history to the people is the same as the relationship of a mother to her child.
Study history. Unlock your genetic memory. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.